Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For this particular demonstration, for those who might have come in just a little late, we're going to be demonstrating making a single bottle wine rack, which will be a tabletop version. The overall construction of the piece will be something like a coil, which will wrap around the bottle itself and keep it pointed downhill, if you will. The wine bottle needs to be stored so that way the cork remains damp, so that way it doesn't leak. It doesn't spoil the taste of the wine. So, we're also going to be incorporating several small elements of the piece. In particular, we're going to be making this a bit of an unorthodox piece. Typically, I make these pieces with wine or grape-themed pieces, like grape leaves, little tendrils. This particular one is going to have a pea pod and also some leaves. We're going to start out by making the pea pod. Right in the forge here, we have a short length of 5/8 round rod. This is all low carbon steel. And what we're going to do, we're going to take that bar and we're going to make the shell of our pea pod. And it's also going to form part of our stem. I've got it in the forge right now, and we're just about at the temperature. So for this particular size, it's going to be approximately 3.5 to 4 inches long, and we're going to have 3 separate peas inside the pod. So to start out with, we're going to drop a 1-inch taper off the tip of the bar. So now when it comes to forging the steel, generally I have an approach that once it grows just a little cold, you see that shadow start to creep in, put it back in the fire. Because it's easier on the steel and it's easier on you. I like to think that propane is cheaper than my arm. Now I've just got an octagon cross section. Now we're going to transition this into ground. Now from here, got our taper drawn. We're going to measure for this particular pod 2 inches back. We're going to mark on our steel right there. I don't want to get my folding ruler too close to the steel. It's made of aluminum. I don't want to risk melting it. Go ahead and mark. Just mark this nice and bold so we'll be able to see it in the fire. Place your back in this large. Now from here, we want to create a fuller or a necking right at that mark. So there's a few ways you can do this. You can use a guillotine tool. We're going to be utilizing a spring fuller that's going to fit right in our anvil. It's got a hardy shank on it, so it fits right in the hardy hole, stays put. What we'll do now, we'll come out, we'll place the bar right between the bars of the spring puller, and then from there, we're going to line it up with our mark, and we're going to forge the steel down to a healthy 3/8 of an inch inside. You don't want to forge this down real tight, real small, because you can always forge it down later. You want to have a pretty thick transition leading off into the stem. What we're doing here is we're isolating mass for the pea pod itself. We're also starting the stem transition. So there we can see our transition. I've deliberately left it a bit thick, so that way we can keep a good hold on the steel, and we can always forge it down a little later on. So now, place her back in the forge for another heat. So now, we're going to do 2 separate tapers. We're going to do a reverse taper and a forward taper. The forward taper will be for the stem, and then the reverse taper is going to be for the opposite end of the pea pod's mass, because the pea pod tapers on both ends. So we're going to do the reverse taper first. We're going to start on the near edge of the anvil. I'm going to lay it at a pretty steep angle off the inside, and then from there, we'll angle our hammer match, and then come in and make our reverse taper to match the first one. So there we have our reverse taper. Got a good start. We still have a thick transition. You don't want to see any cracks or little laps in there. It's good and clean right now. Another thing to keep in mind when forging a transition like this is to make sure that you don't thin it too much. You also want to maintain heat in there. You don't want to work these transitions too cold, because that's where things can get dangerous in terms of developing cracks or shuts. In some cases, you just want to baby these things along if it's a particularly thin transition. Now we're going to continue our reverse taper, forge in the corners. And then transition to round. So there we now have our isolated mass for our pea pod. We have about almost 1.5 inches of full dimension here. We have our 2 1-inch tapers. Now we're going to work on the stem, which is going to be forged out of this mass down here. Now, I want to forge the stem next because I don't want to shape the pod fully and then from there go and forge the stem second, because I don't want the pod to burn in the fire or to be stuck in there and just keep scaling. Generally, I like to work from the middle of the bar out whenever possible. That way, as you're working, you can ease the piece out of the fire as you go. That's not always possible with some projects, but it's something to shoot for. Now for the stem, we're going to be forging this pretty aggressively, so that way I don't take up too much time just drawing this out. So we're going to be forging this over the horn of the anvil, and I'm actually going to be utilizing the hammer's corners. We're going to be coming down in almost like a chopping motion with those corners to help forge that out faster. Okay, so there's our first draw. Got a good start. We're now going to return to the forge and carry this taper back. Okay, so now we're going to come back to the horn here, and we're going to continue drawing out that taper. Okay, that's a good length right there for our application. We don't need a real long stem. We're now going to pre-forge this from square to round. Go ahead and take one more heat just to finalize the shape of the stem. Okay, back out here. Just do a little straightening. Give them a good brush here. So we'll take a quick measurement. Make sure we're on task. Yep, that's a good size. So now, stem is all done. We're now going to concentrate on forging the shell for our pea pod. Now, when forging the shell, we're going to take that entire mass on the end of the piece. We're going to be spreading and thinning it as wide, as large as we can make it. Freeform that we've established, basically a cylinder with two tapered ends. And that's going to influence the shape and the form that we'll achieve with our master cup. What we're going to do first is we're going to establish a flat spot on both sides of the piece. Basically, we're going to forge in two flats, and then we're going to use that as the basis for spreading and thinning the mass. So the first heat, we're just going to come onto the face and then establish our two flats. We'll just use the flat face of the hammer. Carry them all the way across. Essentially, that's going to give us a good spot for us to use the peen of the hammer, or cross peen. For this particular shell, the peas will be steel balls, which are ½ inch in diameter. And for a good wrap, or a good sized body, we want the shell to be around 2 inches wide. So I'm just going to use my soapstone to make a mark on either side, so that way I can use that as an active reference while I'm forging. For the next few steps, we're going to be utilizing the peen, or the ridge of the anvil of the hammer right here. We're going to use that to aggressively spread and thin the material.
And folks, let's not forget that this wine holder is up for sale, and right now I'd be getting it at a steal for $100. So
there's our first spread right there. You can see that I've kept most of my hammer blows right down the middle of the stock. We're probably sitting at about 1 inch wide. When it comes to shaping the piece, you want to leave the edges for last. You don't want to thin the edges down right off the bat, because you'll risk making them real sharp. You can get a more uniform distribution of mass if you start in the middle and then work out. Additionally, I don't want to forge it down real thin just using the peen. I want to leave some extra mass so that way I can forge those peen marks out when it comes time to establish the final shape and size. So always build in a bit of extra mass. Keep in mind not to go down too far. It can be easy to get carried away with something like this. Well, we're almost there. We still got quite a bit of thickness in the mass. I'm going to take one more heat using the peen. I want to maintain fairly straight parallel lines to the main body of the pea pod, and of course maintain the taper on both ends. As the steel starts to thin, I will tend to adjust both of those parameters. You don't want to leave all the adjustments till last. You want to actively manage them as steel is spread and thinned. Otherwise, if you get the steel real thin, you try to change the taper or try to establish those parallel lines, the steel has a tendency to just buckle, and you'll have a harder time achieving those shapes. The parallel lines are starting to come out a little bit. They're starting to get a bit more convex, but we still got plenty of mass in the steel to correct that. The reverse taper back in here is getting a little vague, but again, we can correct that. The forward taper is still nice and strong. The reverse taper is probably the toughest part to keep correct, being that it tends to be just a little more vague than the forward taper, being that it doesn't quite taper to a sharp point. I'm going to take this time now to do a bit more correction on the shape. This particular cross peen that I have right here, this is almost a rounding hammer. It has a very strong crown in the face, and this will allow me to get back into that transition a little better to shape that reverse taper, get it back where it's where we need it to be. Just supporting him over the horn. Trying to keep the taper fairly short. And again, we're doing this with plenty of thickness in the bar. There, we can now see the reverse taper is much better. We're going to do a little bit more work on the forward taper and then square up the parallel sides right there.
Ben, we have a question from the audience from Charlie. He's asking, what kind of anvil is that? It's a gorgeous anvil. It's an excellent shape.
Yeah, this particular anvil is a Nimba. Nimba Anvils was founded by a longtime NWBA member, and they're actually made over in Western Washington, and they are double-horned Italian-style anvils. So the Italian style has a conical horn, which we see here, and we also have the second square horn off the other side. This particular one is called the Gladiator, and this anvil weighs 450 pounds. It's the largest one they make. And you can still buy these brand new from the foundry, and they're just wonderful anvils.
I agree. And Jim Garrett is in the audience. I think you did a wonderful assessment of the anvils he provides.
So now I'm just swapping this back and forth to establish those parallel lines. It's trying to buckle on me a little, but you can see we're starting to reclaim a little bit of those parallel sides. We're going to work on this just a little more.
And Ben, about how thick are you shooting for on the leaf again? in
Well,
terms of
the
width?
pea pod shell should be about just under 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe a fat 1/16. You don't want to have these be overly thin or overly thick. And we're not quite at our finished thickness yet. I'm trying to correct the size while we still have some, I'm trying to correct the shape while we still have some thickness. Don't worry, folks, we're almost there. We're almost past all the grunt work. This will get more interesting in the next few minutes, I promise. Just doing a little straightening. And we'll refine that taper just a little, ease the transition. I don't want there to be these little sharp corners. Okay, we're on target. We're about 1/4 of an inch shy of where I want to be, but we still got plenty of mass in the bar. It's almost 3/16 of an inch thick right now. So we'll have plenty of material to dress out any remaining peen marks and establish the size and the shape we want. Again, you can see that I'm keeping plenty of heat back in the stem transition, so that way we don't get any cracks in there. Because if you don't want the steel to get too cold to where when you're hammering on this mass, it doesn't have a chance to crack. If you keep a little heat back in there, that really helps. Let's take one more heat.
Billy has a question. He says that he notices the pod is bouncing off the anvil. Is that just happening naturally when you hit it, or are you doing that on purpose to try to maintain the heat in the leaf?
Yeah, that's, I should have mentioned that at the moment. I'm deliberately raising the piece off the anvil face just after I strike, so that way the steel doesn't just remain in contact with the anvil, because the anvil acts as a big heat sink. And with thinner steel, by kind of bouncing it off of there and just reestablishing contact before you hit, that increases the amount of time you have to work with the steel. Otherwise, if you keep him right on there, it's just going to suck the heat out.
Indeed. Thank you for covering that.
Otherwise, in any other case, I want the steel not to move at all unless I want it to. So to have the steel just arbitrarily bouncing around and doing whatever it wants is not acceptable. Okay. There, we're now at the target width. Just give them a good scrub here. Remove any of that excess loose scale on there. We're doing okay. Now, we're going to start shaping the shell body itself. We're going to transition to our swedge block, which we have situated right here. We're going to use these half-round swedges in order to progressively shape the shell body. We want to establish a half-round in shape. We're going to start here at the large one, and then we'll gradually go down the line. We're also going to switch to our little rounding cross peen here. It has a much gentler peen on it. That way, this will be less prone to leaving marks on the inside of the shell. So there's a good start right there. Now, another way to do this is if you have a London style or a London pattern anvil that has a step, that works real well too. These Nimbas also have kind of a pseudo step right here, and we can use that to help finish the shape. So now we'll just rest it right in there. We can tighten this up. Do just a little straighten. There, that's about what we're looking for right there. Now for the next heat, we're going to close up each end one at a time. Now, this next step, we're going to enclose both of these tapers, both the reverse taper and the forward taper. So that way they're kind of like a rolled cone on both ends. But we're going to leave the middle open. The P's that we'll be utilizing inside the shell are actually reclaimed ball bearings, about 1/2 inch in diameter. And you don't want to drop your ball bearings into the shell right now while it's just a half round, because the P's will escape before you can close the shell. So you need to have a means of trapping them so they don't get away. So now we're going to go to the horn, and we're going to start with the forward taper, with the reverse taper. Basically, we're just going to work both sides. That way they close in evenly. We'll also use this time to do a bit of refining to the stem transition. So there we have our first end closed. We're now going to do likewise to the other end.
Well, don't sell yourself short, because you know, you can have all the best teachers in the world, but if you don't learn, you're not learning.
Okay, let me give them a good scrub here. At this point, once I start getting the final shape determined, I like to scrub my steel real well with a wire brush, so that way I can dislodge as much of that scale as I can. keep the piece clean. So there we can see we've got both ends closed, but I've left the middle open. So now with the next heat, we're going to have our ball bearings on hand, and we're going to drop them in. Again, we've closed in both of these ends so that way our piece can't run away. So now, there's our ball bearings. Now, when it comes to closing these in, we're going to utilize a combination of our scrolling tongs and our hammers. So once we bring the shell out, I'm going to drop them all in, one behind the other in a neat row. And then from there, we're going to start with the scrolling tongs first. And we're going to use that to help squeeze the shell in. You don't want to strike it with a hammer right off because sometimes a hammer blow could cause one of these little guys to fly out. So go ahead and squeeze the shell first, and then you can come in with gentle hammer blows to finish the job. Okay, there we go. 1, 2, and 3. Try and get them in the middle here. Close up from this end first. And close front end in the back. Just gentle hammer blows. We're going to try to keep them visible. This shell came out a bit wider than I was hoping. Don't worry, not all is lost. We're now going to return it to the forge. We're going to open the shell up just a little more, just so that way we can see those peas real well. Right now, the shell is heating up, and the shell will always heat up faster than the ball bearings will, because naturally they're a lot cooler than the shell, and the shell is also thinner, so it will heat up. It'll heat up faster than the balls will. So the balls will still be fairly cool inside of there. You'll be able to see them real good. I'm going to open this up just a little. I'm going to pry just a little. I'm going to coax him down. Got to close up that other end. Coaxing that in as well. Just trying to tighten him up. That way we can see him. Okay, now I'm actually going to take a heat. There's a bit more scale on here than I'd like to see. So I'm going to give him one more heat, and we're going to give him a good scrub. Okay. So now, pod is all finished. Well, now we're going to set this aside. We're going to move on with the leaf elements on our piece. Come in here for a little closer view.
That looks so nice.
So now, for the leaves on this piece, there's a variety of ways you can make leaves. You can forge them out of a single large piece of steel, or what we're going to do here is we're going to be forge welding a little leaf blank, what we have here. We're going to be forge welding it to a stem, which in this case is going to be 3/16 of an inch round rod. And the leaf blank itself is 1/16 of an inch, I think this is 16 gauge sheet steel. Now, prior to weld, there's going to be some material prep. We're going to be going over here to the vise, and we'll show you what I'm doing. So now we have the bar clamped vertically in the vise, just protruding just above jaws right there. There's just a little burr on it. I'm going to use my file just to remove that. It's best to remove these burrs while you have the chance. They can come back to haunt you in the worst way if you don't get them cleared off. Now from here, we're going to take our hacksaw and we're going to cut down the center of our rod about 1/2 inch. You could use like a powered bandsaw. Hacksaw gives you a lot of control. Getting this centered right down the middle is pretty important. You can deal with a little bit of variation, but want to be as even as possible. Basically, watch as the cut goes on down through. The depth of the cut should be the width of the bandsaw's blade. There, that looks pretty good. Let me just get it out of the, excuse me. I'll get it out of the vise and we'll show you what I've got here. Don't know how well that's coming. Try that. You see it's right down the middle. So now that our cut's complete, what we're going to do next, we're going to use our file, and we're going to just file a taper right on the end. You want to saw cut this first because if you file or forge the tip first, you'll have a very hard time trying to get your bandsaw or your hacksaw to cut right on the tip of that taper and then cut it all the way down. This also helps to keep additional mass in the piece. Basically, I'm just going to pare it down till you have a fairly sharp taper on the tip. I'm going to do just a little blending, so that way the taper comes off a little smoother, fairly abrupt as it was. I'm also going to deburr the edges of the cut. A nice half round or a sharp edged file works good for this. Set the file aside and show you where we're at now. Through okay?
Yeah, nice.
So now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to clamp them in the vise horizontally. And now we're going to use a hot cut chisel or a chisel with just a fairly sharp edge. And now we're going to place the edge of the chisel right in the cut, and then with just light hammer blows, we're going to open the cut just a little. Let me set my chisel aside. Now let me get my leaf blank. I'm just going to check the fit here. That's just about right. You want the cut just wide enough so that the leaf blank will go in. We'll start inside. Now what you do next, we're going to take that leaf blank, we're going to place him in the vise, clamp it down tight. And now right here is where I want the stem to be attached. So we're going to take that cut, we're going to center him right in the transition right there, and then striking the opposite end of the 3/16 round stem material, we're going to drive him off. Stem material here is just a little on the long side, so I'm kind of steering him on. You want to drive him down as far into that crux as you can. Hang on a second here. And now, make sure you've got pressure on there so he doesn't move around. So there, if you can see that, the leaf is now being held on just by pressure. It's just a press fit right now.
Nice.
And you can see he's not coming off of there. And now he's ready for welding. So we're going to set him aside just for the moment. We're going to adjust our forge just enough so we can bring up the welding temperature real quick. We're going to let the forge come up the temperature. We're going to shuffle our tooling just a little here. Now to make this weld, I've got this second smaller anvil. We're going to move him right up here. So that way, I don't have to go all the way to the Nimba to make this weld. Half the battle with making a good forge weld is to make sure that all of your tooling is in place. So that way, you don't have to scramble at the last second. Now the flux that we're going to be using here, this is anhydrous borax. Borax should be kept in an airtight can, so that way it won't absorb moisture. Now when making these, when using a flux, you can use 20 mule team borax, which you can buy from the grocery store, and that works okay. Anhydrous borax works a lot better. It liquefies easily and it stays put. The 20 mule team borax has a tendency to kind of create these little bits and pieces that don't stay put. When it comes to making this weld, it's going to happen pretty quick. So I'm going to explain everything before we do it. Now, general procedure here, we have our leaf in place, and we're now going to place it inside the forge. I'm going to wait until it reaches about a red in temperature. Basically, I'm looking for the point at which the anhydrous borax will melt onto the surface easily. And we're going to flux it on both sides, just immediately in the weld area here, which is very small. And then from there, we're going to put him back in the forge. And we're going to watch as the color comes in. The leaf is going to heat real fast because it's a lot thinner than our round rod. And then from there, We're going to wait until we see a uniform distribution of heat throughout both the leaf and the stem. And I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for a very bright orange to almost a yellow. It doesn't need to be quite a yellow. I'm also going to be looking for an indication from the flux. Once you see at that welding temperature, you'll see little tiny bubbles start to appear on the surface. They'll be like incandescent light bulbs coming on and off. Once you see that uniform heat, just shy of a yellow, almost more of a bright orange, and then those tiny bubbles is ready to go. Then it's straight out to the anvil, where we're going to put in 2 light flows on both sides, and that will make our weld. I'm going to have my flux spoon right handy here, and I'm not going to rest the piece on the forge itself. Maybe a little bit. We're going to give us a little more heat. Turn the gas up just a little more. Again, I'm just looking for a bit of red, just enough where the flux melts. On one side, on the other. So now things are going to happen fast. I'm not habitually staring into the forge. I'm just taking little glances here and every few seconds. That way my eyes don't get fatigued. There's good color in the leaf. I'm just going to hold him flat. There's no need to turn him. The flux is nice and glossy. We just need a little more color in the stem. Just a little more. See, it's nice and glossy. There, we're starting to get color in the stem. Okay, I see bubbles. And that's it. Let me get my brush. Give them a good scrub, move as much of that flux as we can. Okay, let me come in here. See that okay?
Ben, have you ever heard of blacksmiths wearing didymium glasses for when they're looking at the forge, especially during forge welding? I know it's very common in glass blowing circles.
Yes, I was watching David Tuthill's demonstration that he was doing on Knife Maker's Corner the other day, and he was mentioning that same thing. What I do is I just take little glances into the forge. I'm not moving my head, I'm just moving my eyes. So I look away, look back, look away. On most welds, I just count to about 2, then I look, just a little glance, look away, count to 2, look back, look away. And that helps preserve your sight.
That's a good approach.
It's not ideal, and it's probably, I don't want to wear shaded goggles because then I can't see the color directly. It kind of throws off your awareness of where the color is. I have experimented with wearing kind of a shaded set of safety glasses, and that can be advantageous for very large welds that take a while to heat up. It can help you identify the bubbles and the skip in the flux. But on little welds like this and little welds we'll be doing later, it's not particularly advantageous. So now carrying on with our leaf, now that we have him welded to the stem, I can see that we've got a good transition, got a healthy connection. We'll see how you'll see how well the weld holds up when you make one of these, when you start shaping them further. So now we're going to bring our work support in. We're going to place him back in the forge, and we're going to start detailing him. Now for first step here, we're going to do two things in this heat. Well, we're probably going to divide this next step here over two heats just to make sure we don't add too much of the steel. We're going to use our little cold chisel here, and we're going to make a vein right down the middle of the leaf. Naturally, we're going to go from the end, and then we're going to stop just shy of the weld. Now give them a good scrub. This also helps to relieve the piece of any leftover flux on the surface. So there's our central vein. Place him back in the forge. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and put my name on it. We're going to use the underside of the leaf for my name stamp.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be my last name. So again, we're going to take him out. Just one good lick is all it's going to take on a piece of sheet here.
Now, did you make that stamp yourself or did you have it made?
I had this particular one made. Steve McGrew up in Spokane made this for me. So now, with the leaf still flat, I'm also going to date the piece. So I've got my two number stamps here. So we're just going to line up those numbers. 2020. I try to mark and date as many pieces as I can. It's for as much myself as it is for the client. It allows me to see when a piece was actually made. If I happen to see it again, I don't have to rely on my old memory about what pieces were made when. It also allows me to measure my progress. So now, I'm going to detail the leaf. Hang on, let me get that thing out of the fire. Getting ahead of myself. Need to have the proper tools in order before we start in. We're just going to use our little tool here, like a little sinking tool, like a little donut seal. We're just going to gently shape the leaf down in there. Okay.
I like the shape of that Hardy tool for dishing.
Well, this is a little tool that I made years and years ago. And it's actually for my smaller demo anvil, so it doesn't quite fit in a Nimba. But it works okay for this application.
There was one question about your other anvil. The one you're working on now is a Nimba, which is the one that you use for the forge weld.
That particular anvil, I use that in my traveling blacksmith shop, my little traveling setup. And it's a little no-name anvil. Doesn't have any kind of identifying marks or maker information on it. By the styling and by its proportions, it's probably a late manufactured anvil, probably in the 40s or even the 50s. It's a cast-bodied anvil. There's an interesting story behind that. There's an interesting story behind this anvil. If we have time left in the demo, we can get to it. But we're going to keep motoring along on this piece. So we're going to set the leaf aside, let that cool down. And now we're going to start on the material for our wine bottle rack itself. So now, what we have here is a piece of 5/16 round rod, and it's about 5 feet long. So this is going to be the basis for our wine bottle rack. So what we want to do first is we want to forge both ends as we please. And these can be as simple as just a simple tendril that has a bit of shape, form, and flow to it, or it can be as complicated as like a leaf, or it can be have a little spiral or a little coil in the steel. I'm going to motor right along on this end. We're just going to be drawing a round taper, probably around 4 inches long. We're going to be kind of moving back and forth between the two pieces, so that way we can make the best use of our time. I'm just going to use my hacksaw to cut the pod off. We're now going to transition back to our 5/16 bore. Let me take a quick measure here. And I like to be fairly generous with the stem off a leaf. Cut this one to about 8 inches. Now we're going to transition back to 5/16 round. And that's a pretty fair taper. Let's now reforge it back to round. Let me grab my file and we can deburr those parts at the same time. So now, for the sake of explanation, we're just going to concentrate on the 5/16 bar right here. Generally, if I was working by myself, I would make room in the forge for another element. For instance, I could probably get the leaf for the pod in there and start working on the other ends here, which will be making the forge welding scarves out of. But for the sake of the demonstration, we're just going to exclusively focus on the 5/16 bar here for the time being. Just doing a little bit of planishing just to smooth that surface. Now from here, we're going to take this taper and we're going to roll him up into a tight coil. We're going to start with a real tight curl on the tip, and then we're just going to roll him up onto himself. This will be the basis for the tight curl or coil. In the example picture, you can see that little coil right in the end of that wine bottle rack. Reach in there with my scrolling tongs and just screw up the inside right there. So there's the start of it right there. Now this next one or two heats will be able to move a little faster. Start rolling this up. Basically, you want to use just gentle glancing blows over the far side of the anvil to start with. Then we'll use gentle blows again just to start rolling that up. Let me change the angle here so you can see what I'm doing. There, that's better. So there you can see we just now have this tight coil.
Mhm.
So what we're going to do next is we're going to bend the coil 90 degrees to the length of our bar, and then we're going to use our scrolling tongs to pull that element out, so that way it's like a cone-shaped spiral. Like it's going to be an organic tendril. So now, just a quick bend. And now we're going to use our scrolling tongs to take little bends to pull the shape out. Do a little adjustment.
Nice. Billy O says that you have made that look easy, and that's what I was going to say before. Is I know some blacksmiths steer away from scrolls, I think because they're intimidated, and you do very fast work, very precise. It was nice to see.
Well, the scrolling tongs, those are kind of a crutch for getting these things shaped just right. I'm pretty sure that there are blacksmiths out there that can just do all what I just did right there with just a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm just going to clench that coil off so that way we can handle it. We're going to work on the other end. So now the second end, it's going to be a little simpler. It's just going to be a taper, and we're going to add a few flowing bends to it. We're also going to add a little loop in the length. Basically, it'll be just a little wrap in the tendril's length. But of course, we'll first start off with the taper, give or take 4 inches long.
I think I'm about to wrap this auction up. I mean, I can see the end is in sight here. It looks like it's down to just a couple of folks. So keep an eye on the chat. I'm going to start doing some final calls.
Cool. Thanks, Kellen.
And as I'm forging it, you can see that as I'm hitting both sides, I'm turning it left, right, left, and right. That technique is commonly referred to as hit turn. Basically, as your hammer's going up, you're turning, and then by the time you come down, you're on to the next base. Your hammer comes down, strikes. So that way, your piece only remains in contact, in face contact with the anvil just for a moment. It helps preserve the heat in the steel, allows you to get in more work.
Do you ever teach classes or workshops at your shop in maybe years that aren't 2020?
Well, as of right now, my shop is a bit on the small side, and I'm rather limited in terms of room. And I don't quite have enough tooling to go around for students just yet, but I do intend to teach in the future.
Understood. I should hope so.
So now just to touch on the basics, it's a little hard to see on this piece, being that it is quite small. But you can see we have a true octagon taper. So that way it has 8 equal sides. That intermediary stage is critical if you want to have a true round taper. Otherwise, you'll just have more of a square cross section with rounded edges. And you won't be able to forge a true round cross section real easy that way. Oftentimes I'll take just the heat just to make sure I've got a nice true octagon before I even start forging in those corners to make it round. Now from here, I'm just going to turn it up on each of those corners. I can just see them. And just run my hammer all the way down front to back on that paper. There we have a nice round taper.
Very
And now
nicely
before I put it back in the fire, I'm going to add a little reference mark here and get my soapstone. And then I'm going to measure down from the tip, say about 14 inches. This is just a reference point. This end here is where we're going to be welding on both of our elements. And this is also going to be the leg, if you will, on our freestanding wine bottle rack. And I also have to keep in mind, I have to keep a length of bar through here, which will comprise the body of the bottle rack itself. So you don't want to take too much and you don't want to take too little. That reference mark just keeps in mind where these particular elements begin and end. There's a little wiggle room engineered into this technique and procedure. I still want to keep that in mind. So now, right now, I want to make that little curl, that little coil that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to go to the tip of the horn, and I'm just going to make a tight bend and just curl him around to make that little coil. Tighten him up over the face. I'll be careful not to beat these things to death. It's easy to mar these guys. I'm going to cheat a little bit and use my scrolling tongs. We're going to keep him fairly straight. This will be advantageous during the welding process. Okay. As far as I'm going to take him. Now it's time to turn our attention back to our elements. I will get a grip on him just like that. Now from here, I'm going to forge down that mass just a little. We want to maintain a round cross section. And then from there, I'm going to forge the short and sharp taper off the tip. This is going to be the start of our scarf. The scarf on this is going to be 1/2 a weld joint. Basically, I'm just reestablishing ground. Now we're going to start our paper. We'll take one more quick heat here and then I'll show you what I'm up to. What we have here, we have the start of our scarf. You can see we have a built up mass right here, and we have our little taper right off the tip. What we're going to do next is we're going to transition to the swage block, and we're going to use the smallest V groove on there to complete the scarf. What we're going to do is once we have a heat on this, we're going to lay them in the swage block just like that. And then from there, we're going to use our cross peen and we're going to forge a groove into this side of the scarf. And that groove is what will interface with our 5/16 round rod. That's a good start right there. Let me show you what we've got so far. So there's our groove. And if we turn it here, you can see the little ridges here and here. And then
That looks
there,
really nice. We can't see it.
Yeah, so there's our groove. And from there, if I turn it, you can see the little ridges right there. Right there. And you can also see we have this defined ridge right here. What I'm going to do in the next heat is I'm going to forge this groove in deeper. And I'm going to thin this edge here and this edge here. And that will be the leading edges of our scarf. The reason I'm doing this inside this V block here, this V groove, is so that way we maintain the mass needed for the weld itself. If we were just to forge this over the face of the anvil, we would just end up spreading and thinning the material, and that would result in a poorly shaped scarf and would also thin the material, which would result in a weak weld. You always want to have
That's
a
a
little
really good.
You always want to have a bit of extra material in your welds. So that way you can dress them out. You have a little bit more to go around. You take one more heat and we'll be just about there on those edges. Once we get those edges thinned, then we will compare them to our 5/16 round rod, and we can adjust it as we need it. Really just concentrate on getting those edges thinned. Okay, I'm going to have a quick comparison here. We see it on the side view right there. You can see we're real wide. We're going to tuck in those edges so that way it has a good fit. What we'll do next, we'll use our little ball peen hammer just to close up that scarf and make it so it's a good fit. Very gently. And then, of course, we'll go back here to our rod, see how we're fitting. Just a little. Bump them down just a little. Bend the stem just a little bit to improve that fit. Let me get him situated here so we can see how he's doing. There, the fit's much better. I'm going to take one more heat just to give him that final size. The better your scarves fit together, the easier your welds will be. Kind of a loose and ill-fitting scarf is is much more difficult to weld than one that fits real nice. Additionally, the scarf also anticipates the shape to come, which in this case, we want to have this be like a branch that flows right out of the existing material. Just gonna rest the bar on the face. Just gonna give him a little tap. Make sure he fits properly. There. Okay, now we're going to use our wire brush just to give him a good scrub on the inside, just to remove any loose oxidation. We'll give you one last look here at the scarf. Try to get him. There you can see
Nice.
how thin those edges are. And you can also see that, that groove in there. As I turn him over, you can see that little ridge goes along the top. That's that extra mass that we built into the scarf. So now our pea pod is ready for welding. So now we're going to turn our attention to the leaf. So we're going to set our pea pod aside. Now we're going to take a different approach to the leaf from making a scarf. We're going to place it in the forge. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to use another forge weld to build mass to make the scarf. What we're going to do, we're going to make what's known as the official term for it is a faggot weld, where pretty much the material is folded over itself. It's basically stacked up on top. This is a technique of building mass by utilizing the forge weld to build that mass up. So what we're going to do first, we're going to forge a short, sharp taper right off the tip of the stem. So there, we have our little sharp taper right there. Now, the reason why I want to build mass here, because of how thin the material is. It's only 3/16 of an inch round. If I was to do the same thing that I just did with the pea pod scarf, it would be a very, very thin little scarf. It wouldn't have any strength at all. So by building this mass up, we can give a much stronger weld. We can build more mass into it. So this next heat is just to forge that taper round. So there's our little taper. Now, for instance, we could build, another option is to build mass by upsetting, as in shortening and thickening the mass. But for a rod this size, that'd be really tricky. You'd have to have a very isolated heat, and then you'd have to use a lot of very light hammer blows to build that mass. And for the mass that we're going to get out of this forge weld, it's going to be much more efficient than upsetting. So now we're going to shape the joint, the scarf itself. So we're going to use the leaf face up. Just going to fold him over. Make sure he's nice and tight to the other side. I get my brush. So there, we now have our complete scarf, and we're ready to weld. You can see that we are,
Nice.
we just folded him over, so it's round on round. And we also have the taper tight to the rest of the material. The reason why you want to have a taper right there is so that way the weld will blend seamlessly into the rest of the stock. Without this taper, if you just had a square cut right there and you made your weld, you would actually experience a phenomenon which is known as shear plane. And as strange as it may seem, that squared edge will actually cut down through the material and create a weak, and it will create a crack right there, which will result in a weakness in the steel. By reducing this to a fine taper, you're essentially reducing your shear plane to 0, and this will blend cleanly. We've got a good preheat on our piece. So now it's going to be the same technique that we used for the leaf. I want to give them a good scrub first. That's more than enough of a preheat. You got away just a little bit on me, but that's just fine. We'll sprinkle, place him right in there. We're going to use our secondary cross peen. Again, I'm not habitually staring into the fire. I'm just taking brief glances. Here we go. There's no need to. You don't want to hit him real hard. Just very light blows is all that's necessary. I'm going to take one more forging heat, one more welding heat, just to make sure I tie in that taper. Doing a little shaping up. Now we'll give them a good scrub. Let me quench off the leaf. It's getting just a little warm. Kind of watch the screen here. There. You can see that the tip of the taper is completely blended in. Now we still have this little furrow on both sides. That's just due to the nature of the steel and well, the cross section, I should say. But that's not going to affect the functionality on this particular piece. So now our weld is complete. We're now ready to move on with shaping the scarf. And we're going to make this scarf virtually identical to the one we just made for the pea pod.
How long would it take you to do this process, making the parts and assembling it through forge welding? And do you make one at a time or multiples?
Well, in terms of how long a piece like this takes, using this one as an example, it would probably take me about 2 hours about. This particular one is kind of this is a kind of a one-off piece. Generally, I don't make them this complicated. And in terms of time efficiency and what exactly I do, I'll try to work as many pieces as I can in the fire at a time, as many as I can keep up with. It's the best use of your time and your fuel. you try to be as efficient as you can be. And again, once the piece comes out of the forge, then it's straight to the anvil. Put in the time for the operation. Forge the piece as you please, and then once it cools down, it's straight back to the forge. You don't want to be just lingering with the steel. That way you can take advantage of any residual heat that's left in it. Now ready to put in the major shape of the scarf. So again, we're transitioning back to the sledge block. And we're going to do likewise with this particular piece, just like as we did with the pod. I'm going to go into that little V groove. This is also a good test of your weld. If that weld wasn't any good, portions of the steel would be moving around. Just checking the size. I'm going to take just a quick heat to just help size the piece. Well, to be quite frank, it's not enormously remarkable to get consistent welds. Blacksmiths routinely do many forge welds at a time without issue. And a lot of the more predominant teachers in the craft say that forge welding is a basic skill. It shouldn't be viewed any different from drawing tapers or any other basic procedure. I know that's easy to say. It is something that a lot of people struggle with, and I understand that. But by the same token, it shouldn't be viewed as this thing that's either unknowable or something that can't be done consistently.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, this scarf here it's not as pretty as the other one, but it will work. Just going to close him up just a little. So now both of our pieces are ready for welding. We're going to set our scrap bar aside. Make sure our main bar is cool. So what I'm going to do, racing as best I can, I'm going to open the vise, and then from there, I'm going to clamp two pieces together, just like that. Clamp them together tight. So now, a pair of needle nose pliers with a wire cutter in them, the common tool. I'm just going to bend the stem just a little, so that way he'll come in closer contact with the steel, the rod, I should say. With small welds like this is easier to do. Bigger welds may require a bit of torch work to get these things to fit together properly. Now we're going to utilize that little advantage we built into the rod right there. Just going to start with a tight loop, then we're just going to really tighten him down with our pliers. Once we have them good and tight, we'll cut off the tips. I don't want there to be any kind of obstructions which could get hung up on something. And now further down here, I'm going to put a second tie. I like to put at least 2 ties whenever possible. But at the same time, you don't want to put your wire ties so close to the weld if they get too hot, they start to loosen, or they just simply get in the way.
That's a good point.
If you have 2 points of contact, that just helps keep everything tight in place. Once we have them tight, clip off wires, the excess, I should say. And now, just loosen the vise. Let me bring him around here so you can see him. So there.
Yeah.
By clamping the piece of the vise, that helps bring these together much tighter. You can also see that we have a good few inches between the weld area and the wire tie. So that way, we have a good chance of keeping this guy nice and tight. And this one will probably stay tight as well. Want to have everything at the ready. That way you don't fudge the weld at the last moment. Now from here, we're going to reconfigure the forge lid. We're going to close up the top, and then from there, we're going to pull these 2 bricks out from the face. We're going to create a little channel right in front of it. Basically, it's going to be a little trough where we will settle the rod. See, we're going to place a rod right in like that. You can see that real nice.
Yeah.
So, what we're going to do, we're going to settle him down in, and we're going to take a good preheat up to a high red, not quite an orange. Basically just enough so that we can get the flux weld to adhere to the weld area. Then from there, we're going to settle him back down to the forge. And again, we're going to wait till we see that high orange, even distribution of heat through both parts. You'll have to wait on the larger round bar. It's easy to jump the gun when you see your scarf getting real hot. But you have to have patience. You have to wait until there's even heat all throughout, basically until the parts disappear into each other. And then lastly, you look for tiny bubbles. And it's those bubbles that are the real indicator. Once you see them, then it's right out of the forge. We're going to come onto the face of the anvil, and we're going to use my little secondary cross peen. Again, it has a very strong crown right in the face. And we're going to go with this order of hammer blows. We're going to go from the tip of the scarf and then work our way up to the back of the scarf. Because the tip of the scarf is going to be very thin. You want to start there first. And then you can move back because the thicker part of the scarf is going to hold on to the heat longer. You're going to be following that little ridge of steel, that corner, if you will, all the way back to the tip of the scarf, the end of the scarf. So just as a mock-up here, we're going to go from the tip all the way to the back, and then we can start rotating it side to side to blend it in. So again, I've got it positioned so that I have as much of those wire ties out of the fire as possible. And I've got the weld about in the middle. or as close as I can get it. Okay, now we're going to use our scrolling tongs just to push it down a little, tighten it up. Now I'm going to apply our flux both sides, a little on top. Settling back down. I'm resting the piece on the brick here. That way, I don't encourage a bend to come into the fall. That way, it's well supported. Nope. See, it's all scaly. I don't want to try that. So I'm just going to give them a good scrub. And reflux. Sometimes it's about knowing when to weld and when not.
Mhm. Yeah.
If I
like
would have
seeing
struck that, nothing would have happened.
Mhm.
Basically, I waited just a little too long. And I'm liking this one better. If you see it scaly, and if you don't see that glossy surface, it's not a good sign. You shouldn't hit it. There. I'm going to take one more heat, one more welding heat. I just got him lightly packed.
Charlie asks, would it work to spot weld the pieces together, then finish with a forged weld? Do you have experience
You can
with
do
that?
that.
then? Okay.
I've done that a few times. You just have to be sure that you have a way to blend out that tack weld if you want to have a seamless piece. Just trying to be very gentle with it. This scarf here was just a little on the thin side. There, we got her.
Nice.
You can see that there's a uniform distribution of heat throughout. There's no hot or cold spots. So now, I'm going to dare to do a little straightening. Okay. So now I'm going to use my pliers here to break my ties. More than go here. There's no need for them to stay on there any longer. Okay. Okay, one down, one to go. My forge is not quite cooperating like it should, but we'll be okay. Now we're going to do likewise V-pod.
Nice.
I'm going to place this one directly opposite our leaf stem, down just a little further. We're going to place it down just a little further. bar is just a little hot, so consequently it's making placement just a little more difficult. Okay. This one's going to be a little trickier to do. Sometimes a shape can give you a little trouble. Let's see if I can get a third tie on here, just to make sure he's going to stay put. Let's see if I can tighten that. Okay. Going to ease her out, and then we're going to use our spooling tongs again to put it tight to the stock. Make sure we have adequate coverage in this one. Yeah, see it's real crusty. Forge is just, well, not too worried, folks. I'm going to stay on it here for as long as it takes. You can probably hear my forge puffing and puffing. This is a relatively new forge design for me. Definitely know what I'm going to be changing on it. That could have something to do with the way it's heating these welds. Okay. So we got her just tacked. Now in front of the weld. Okay, folks, just about there. Just trying to be very conservative with this. For the benefit of the project. Thanks for bearing with me, folks. But we've done it. The weld is successful. That's
Excellent.
well, yeah, that's a kind of a
Bravo.
well. That's
Right.
not a very good. That's not a very good vote of confidence when the demonstrator has a hard time.
Oh, I don't know. I've seen plenty of demonstrations, and I have seen there is always a struggle when there is an audience. I don't know if you've experienced that before, but I think it's a common thing that happens in demonstrations. But they end up being teaching moments.
Just trying to get these wire ties off of here. Okay, I'll show you the weld.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Very clean. Excellent job, Ben.
Okay. All right, we're almost done with the forging. One more step to go, and that's going to be to detail all the pieces here. Right now, they're all just in a straight line. That was for the sake of welding. You don't want to have too much curve or too much bend in a piece. This is all kept straight for the purposes of making the forge weld. So now, with the forge still in its configuration here, I'm now going to start shaping the main bar and the stems of both the leaf and the pea pod. And I'm going to try to keep the pea pod out of the fire. Try to keep it from scaling. Mostly going to be using the scrolling tongs for making the shapes. Just use our hammer to make sure the design is going to be fairly flat. Just going to reach in here and gently pull him away. Oh! Well, folks, that was embarrassing. Well,
No, that's Murphy's Law.
well, folks, that was rather embarrassing. Well, folks, I know what went wrong with that one. It was just too cold. Too cold. Before I started those bends, I should have let it get hotter.
Understood. I know it comes at a price, but I appreciate the learning moment. And so thank you for explaining your processes.
Now this one here is pretty weak. This weld right here. I'm going to be as gentle as possible with it. That's all the bending I'm going to do on that one.
Yeah. Anyone who demonstrates a fair amount knows that when you have eyes watching the work, that something will go wrong. And I think it's for the teaching moment.
Okay, we're going to do just a little more on this piece. we're going to coax a little more heat into that stem. I want to detail it to as much as I can. In fact, we're going to step over to the vise so that way we can keep this guy together so I don't stress that weld unduly. Just going to gently clamp the weld area in the vise so that way we don't stress him. And we're going to turn the leaf. And we're going to bend a little coil in there.
I seem to recall a quote, I believe it was Francis Whitaker. I heard this around a campfire at one point. He was demonstrating in front of a large group, getting ready to set a weld, and then the weld failed, and he looked up at the halogen lights and said, well, you can't ever set a weld in halogen lights because you can't read the heat. So I think it's always nice to have a scapegoat if you have one.
Yeah. It's nice.
Okay, folks, just a little more on this and then we'll move on. Folks, I'm just going to be, excuse me, I'm just going to be moving down the length. Try to keep that leaf out of the fire as best we can. I'm trying to coax some additional heat into the bottom end so we can get a bit more shape out of it. I'm just going to use the vise here to align coil. Put a little bit of shape in that bottom end. Okay, almost there. We're now going to detail the bottom end right there. All right, folks. That's as far as we're going to take it.
Well,
We're
Ben,
gonna
I
set
think
this-
that looks great.
So we're going to set this aside. We're going to turn the forge off, and we're going to complete the bottle rack. So now we're just going to swing him back and forth, let him cool down. Quenching him could stiffen the steel and could make this prone to breakage. So we're just going to treat this as gently as possible. Okay, so now to make the shape of our rack, we're going to be wrapping this around cold. The reason why I want to make this cold is because this form here, this is just basically a piece of steel tube. This is actually Schedule 40 pipe. Then it has this welded transition here into the smaller piece. This is dimensionally identical to a wine bottle. So if you were to hot wrap this, it would be tight against the form. And you'd have a hard time getting it out off the form, I should say. Additionally, it would also hold a bottle real tight. You wouldn't hardly be able to move it. You'd have a hard time getting it in and out. So by doing this cold, there's a principle in steel which is known as spring back. If you ever take a bar and just bend it cold, it'll want to try to take some of that bend out. So if you bend a piece of steel to a 90-degree angle and just let it go, it'll bend back to maybe 85 degrees. That's just a guesstimate on my part. But basically, if we wrap this hard around here cold, then it will spring back, then it will have a little slop. And that will make getting the bottle in and out much easier. So now, I want to have at least 14 inches for our leg. So we'll go to about right there. And what we want to do, we want to rack our piece in the vice jaws just like that. And then from there, we're going to bend steel about right like that, just about just shy of a 90-degree bend. We want to move we're going to move the form, our mandrel, off just a little here so we can trap that rod. And then from there, once we have a good bite, hey, this must be cold rolled. It's bending a lot harder than it usually does. We're just going to go all the way up the length of the mandrel. Yeah, this is definitely cold rolled steel.
Ben, do you, seeing that if it's cold rolled, if you had done this, if you knew this in hindsight, would you have heated more of that bar and let it kind of just air cool?
Yeah, that's certainly an option. You could anneal it, and that would help. But we'll get it. And thankfully, the bar ends that we forged even annealed a little bit. Okay. There we are. You can see it lifts off easy.
Ben, just so you know, Rochelle has said that cold rolled steel has given her more problems forge welding than hot rolled. She said this has happened multiple times with cold rolled for some reason.
Yeah, I could see that. So now we're going to come back here to the vise, and we're going to use our bending fork and our scrolling wrench. We're just going to straighten this out. So that way our leg is 90 degrees to the length of our coil. Then we're going to make another 90-degree bend. Okay, so there's our second bend. I'm going to come back to the anvil real quick. Check the alignment. There, that looks pretty good. You can see we have the bottom end here resting on the anvil face. And we have the leg here resting evenly there. We're now going to take this straight segment. We're going to just do we're going to do a very conservative bend right in here.
Nice.
We're going to try to stay out of that weld. Okay. I'm going to make one more bend here just to bring her down into alignment so it rests correctly. Okay, just a little more. Okay, just a little bend more. Well, we're just doing kind of the fiddly work here. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so where we are now, it's leaning out just a little. I'm going to make another bend right here, just kind of roll the whole thing this way. Otherwise, if there's a bottle in there, he's just going to kind of roll over on his side. For all intents and purposes, it's done. It sits just about right. But of course, there's finishing yet to go. There's some scale that needs to be removed and then the finish applied. But for all intents and purposes, it's done. Warts and all.
Well, it was
That's
quite the learning
wonderful,
experience,
Ben.
I think, for everyone. It was so great to watch you work. I'm so glad you got your internet working in their shop. And I'm really looking forward to a day we can come back and visit you again. Hope we didn't scare you off with having a failure in front of all of us. I think that's all just, you know, part of the process. None of us are strangers to failure.
Well, Kellen, if I could be scared off by a failure this spectacular, then I wouldn't be a blacksmith.
Love it.
So why don't we get set up for the shop tour, and we'll conclude on that. In terms of the shop tour, here we are in the main forging area. You've been seeing me use the tooling here throughout the demonstration. We're of course familiar with the Nimba. And then from there over here, amongst all the clutter, we have our two forges, which is our gas forge and the coal forge. I don't use the coal forge that often. You can see it has a side draft hood on it. The draft from the stovepipe up here draws the smoke off. I use it occasionally, not nearly as much as I used to. Then over here we have our tool rack. And up here we have just various punches, chisels, fullers, drifts. And then from there down below we have our hammers and top tools. And then of course tongs on either side. And then the middle space is for all the little scraps on this side and all the various hand tools. And they have, of course, numerous functions and so forth. Some are highly specialized, others are more generic. On the back wall here, we have a cone mandrel. This is another specialized tool, much in line with these swedge blocks. It's very good for making rings, large radiuses. This particular one is hollow form cast iron. We'll move the little anvil out of the way. Then this is my Boger Champion model number 2 mechanical power hammer. This particular one, I first got it from a friend of my mother, Kathy Lewis. She lives over in the Tri-Cities area. And I got it from her. She paid a visit to my shop one day and saw what I was up to, and she was very generous. I'm very grateful for it. Unfortunately, this
That's
old hammer,
gorgeous.
it's kind of had a hard life before I got it. Boger Champion aficionados and owners will recognize that this hole right here is not factory. It's because it's been fish plated on both sides. It's probably got a cracked ram at some point in its life. And these holes on the side, I didn't put those in. Somebody tried to convert this to a freestanding electrical hammer by having a pivoting platform off the back. That's not the best way to run these hammers. So I removed that, but took advantage of these tapped and threaded holes to help stiffen the mast. The mast itself, which is the big piece of tube right here, that of course supports the motor and the jack shaft up above. You want this to be pretty solid, the mast. I had a lighter one on this hammer, but it just wasn't up to the task. This particular one, that's 6-inch square tube with a 1/2-inch wall. So it's got a lot of stiffness to it. Up above, it's got a 7.5 horsepower electric motor. That's more than enough to run a hammer like this. Basically, with the phase converter I've got and the motor up there, the whole electrical system never breaks a sweat when running the hammer. Then we've got the jack shaft up top with the V pulleys up top coming off the motor. And then that's a pair of John Deere 95 belts that runs the hammer up there. Then from there, we'll have a brief word about the small anvil right here. This particular anvil, I use it for my demonstration setup. Folks have probably seen it kicking around at Blacksmith Week or any number of the NWBA events where I've taken my traveling setup. There's an interesting story behind this anvil. Had to have been about 10 years ago now. My father was coming home from the Tri-Cities up to a spot on Highway 12. It's right in front of what's called 9 Mile Hill, just outside the small town of Touchy. And he sees something strange right in the middle of the road at the foot of the hill. So he goes around it. He decides to stop and get it out of the way for the next guy, whatever it might be. He gets out, walks back, and I kid you not, it was that anvil. So he tossed it in the back of the truck and brought it home. And it did not come in this condition. But right there was the only good corner it had on it. The rest of it was all chipped and broken away. And it had some mars and dings in it. So this was a complete restoration. All of the broken portions are all ground away. And then this was all rebuilt with hard facing. If you see it in just the right light, you can see where the welds are on it.
Yeah.
And it's been a very good little anvil for me. It's not too big, so it's easy to move around, but yet it has an unusual amount of mass to it for an anvil of its particular size. I forged a lot of steel off of that. So that's about the main forging area right here. If we come around to the other side of the shop, you'll have to pardon the lights. They were used for making sure we had enough illumination. Obviously,
No, that's really nice.
obviously oxygen and acetylene system here. Then we have our little wood stove in the back. And some spare tooling. Here. Then from there we have a vintage iron collection, things that I've procured over the years. Then over here we have this is a Powermatic 1200 drill press. It's a variable speed. So that way once it's running, all you got to do is just move this dial on the front and it will go from about 130 RPM to about 1200. It's a very nice drill press. I was fortunate to come across it. It also has this nice milling vise on it. And then lastly, we have our cabinet with abrasives, drill bits, finishing products, toolbox with various hand tools, C-clamps, various other supplies. And then hiding in the corner here at the traveling shop, either a little coke forge or a little gas forge. And then post vise and a few other odds and ends. Overall, the shop is about 560 square feet. With a shop this small, you need to be efficient with your space. Okay, well, you take care and God bless. I truly appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Yes,
Happy
and
New
Merry
Year.
Christmas.
This slideshow is pulled directly from his website, Artistiper Forge, which is artistiperforge.com, but we can get that in the chat feed. This is in no particular order. Ben, if you're able to see this, just kind of give us a walkthrough if there's anything you feel necessary.
if you have been coming to NWBA events or summit events over the last few years, I'm sure you've seen Ben demonstrate up at Blacksmith Week. Usually is set up outside of the little gas house. It's up there. So this sign should be familiar to folks. Usually has it out there. I personally am really a big fan of Ben's super clean lines and traditional work. He does a fantastic job of making what feel like simple forgings be very beautiful and often complex, but they are so well executed that they make you feel like they should be easier than they are. But they're quite difficult a lot of the times. This is similar to what he's going to be making today, a single bottle wine rack. I know he's doing
this particular piece, the image that we're seeing on the screen right now, that is a single bottle wine bottle rack. And this particular one is for a tabletop. It's freestanding on a level surface. And we're going to be making one that's similar to this, but we're going to be adding some additional elements through forge welding to the piece itself. And the piece is going to be slightly unorthodox. Usually I make these with grape leaves, something that would fit with the wine theme. But this is going to be a little one-off piece we're going to make. We're going to be making this one with pea leaves and also a fully forged pea pod on it.
Oh, excellent. Looking forward to seeing that. These photos are in no particular order, so they're kind of a little out. This is a close-up detail of I believe it's a table that we'll get to a larger photo of.
That's a beautiful pass through and wrap. Those are gorgeous. Now, Ben, how long have you been blacksmithing? Like, when was your first experience seeing it or doing it?
Well, my first time ever heating steel and forging it had to have been back in at least 2001, 2000. And it really just started with curiosity that I had with some of the old tooling that we had on my father's farm. And he taught me what he knew, and it was the basics, enough to get me started. And I made toasting forks for a long time. I actually have the very first toasting fork that I ever made kicking around here somewhere. And it's, let's just say I've come a long way.
I know you have come a long way.
Indeed.
I know Ben has been coming to NWBA events since you were a teenager, isn't that right?
Yes, my father, Richard, he was a member before I was. And he's no longer a member. His membership has lapsed. That's the point. But anyways, I used to go to a lot of events with them back in the day. First one I ever went to was, had to have been I think it was 2003, back when it was being held in Enumclaw. Back in those days, the association moved around before we got our permanent home in Longview.
Indeed. That's so neat to hear that you not only learned from your father, but that he was a member before you. I wasn't aware of that detail. That's really cool, Ben. Oh, and Kenny O says that he does like how he can see the floor of your shop. People appreciate how pristine you are. Oh, this is gorgeous. Where is this pond?
Oh, that particular piece right there, that is a pond cover that I made about 2 years ago. And that's at a private residence here in Walla Walla. And the pond is held within that retaining wall. And the gentleman that I made that for, he wanted to keep the great blue herons coming along and plucking the fish out of his pond. That particular piece also has a pond theme. It has hollow formed sheet steel stones, frogs. It also has birds, dragonflies. It also has like little bulrushes and cattails in it. There might be some
Wow.
detail shots in there too.
I'm not entirely sure that I grabbed the detail shots. You had so many good pictures. I wanted to just kind of pick a good handful of them.
Yeah.
But,
And the entire piece is also like a half cylinder, so it has this high dome to it. So that way, if the owner ever has to get in there for maintenance, he can get inside there.
was very well executed, Ben.
Well, thank you.
This is a 3-bottle wine rack. You can see where the curly cues are that could grab the bottles. And Ben, as we're going through this, I know you have a website, and I encourage folks to go and check out your website. But if somebody was interested in, this wine rack or one of the other kind of product line things that you make, how would they go about purchasing one of those from you?
Well, I'm a bit behind the curve when it comes to online sales. So the best way at this juncture is to contact me directly via email and simply express what you might be interested in.
Perfect.
And then from there, I can make pieces on a custom basis.
I'm going to stop on this photo real quick. This is a whelk shell. I believe they're referred to as a Lawrence the whelk shell. Ben has turned these into bottle openers, but I have watched Ben demonstrate these whelk shells a few times and have attempted them myself, and they provide all sorts of challenges to most folks, and I think Ben just makes them look so easy and does such a clean job with these shells of all sizes. I've seen them small and quite large. But this next section here, I did do a little bit of cleaning up the slideshow. So these are a bunch of his bottle openers. These are some wine openers with these beautiful little penny scrolls at the ends. And the kind of Mark Asprey style wizard head. And if you have ever seen these cowboy looking ones on the side, it is like a self-portrait of Ben put in steel. I just love your take on these ones.
They're gorgeous. Ooh.
And
I
Ben,
love the time.
Oh, I was gonna say, Ben, this is the belt buckle you wear most days, right? I think I've seen you with this thing on.
Yeah, I've got it on right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a one-off belt buckle that I made back in, I think, 2015. And I used to have another belt buckle that was not quite as nice as this, so I made this one as a little one-off project. And you can see that we have the cross at the center of the buckle, which is the cross of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And it's as the center of the buckle, as is the center of my life. Then from there we have the anvil, which is the sigil of our craft. And then from there we have the exterior, the border, if you will, which is an endless twist, which represents eternal life.
Oh, that's gorgeous, Ben. You really did all of those themes justice.
Oh, here's another detail shot of that table. I think we'll get to the actual picture of the table eventually. And this is a front view. We had a slide earlier where all this flat bar that has been slit, drifted, pass-throughs, rivets. I really enjoy this piece, and it's all traditionally made.
Yeah, that particular piece That's one of the crosses that I made for a historical organization called it's a Historical Society for the Germans from Russia. And they had me make several of these for one of their donation drives from major donors. And I like the design quite well, so I made one for myself for posterity. And this is a nice piece because it looks quite plain at a distance, just almost like a sketch. But then, as you get closer, start viewing it from different sides, it gets more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very much like the Word of God.
Ben, about how big is this? It's hard to tell scale here.
That particular one is 20 inches tall.
About 20 inches tall, you said?
Yeah, about 20 inches.
Here's a little beautiful railing panel. It looks like it's got some kind of repoussé type work done to it. With these
it's not true repoussé. It's that is all 16 gauge sheet steel, which is hot shaped. So it's not true repoussé. And the entire piece is also all the natural colors of steel, whether it's the high polish or the mill scale, or there's a little bit of bronze in there, which was applied with a brush. And there's some heat coloring in there too. And it's all in high relief on the piece. Every single one of those pieces is actually bolted to a steel backer. And that particular piece I had powder coated, so that way all the colors would stay good. Otherwise, something like that would be highly vulnerable to rust.
Yeah, with all that polished steel in there, it sure would be.
Yeah. Powder coat was just about the only way to go on that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a local powder coater in Walla Walla?
Yeah, I've got a good local powder coater here. I've worked with them on several occasions.
Good. Ben makes a number of coat rack type items that I've seen over the years. He had donated one to the auction that had this fish motif. And I sure do love Ben's fish. They look so realistic, and they all always look, at least to me, a little grumpy about being a fish with their down curved mouth. But they're so well done. And I really like the knots on the end of the bars here. There's the table. This seems like it was a challenging project, Ben. There's a lot going on here. And I know interfacing stone with steel is never easy. And I love your solution with these little leaf tabs that are reaching around and pinning the top down.
Yes, these particular tables, they incorporate a reclaimed granite or some cases marble top. You can get them as scraps from various fabricators for making tabletops or countertops, so forth. And then from there, the entire piece has a frame which is underneath of it, which helps support the stone. And then from there, it has these hot-shaped and wrapped vines that come up and over that holds the stone captive. And then from there, the legs themselves are linked into the frame. And then the joinery on it is all those hot wrapped vines, forms of lattice. To accomplish that, we have those drifted holes that are through each of the legs in 2 locations. And then those vines are then hot wrapped in the walls of those holes. So that way it creates a semi-rigid structure, and it adds some nice detail to the piece. Those can be quite challenging to make.
Yeah, Ben, I have a quick question on this one. The little leaves in the corners that are pinning the stone, did you like preform those and then attach them after the stone was on, or did you bend them over hot after the stone was in there? Like, how did that attachment really work?
Well, what I do with that is I do all the pre-shaping first, because you can apply some heat with a torch, but you don't want to get it near the stone because it can cause spalling and cracking. So I do as much preforming as possible, and how those leaves are attached is they come over underneath the table and they link up with each of the legs where possible. And I actually drill a hole through the top of the leg, and I leave a long tail on the end of the leaf, on the opposite end of the bar. Once I have it preformed, I preheat that entire tail, I push it through that hole, and then I hot wrap the piece to the top of the leg. And that works pretty good.
Yeah, that's a great solution. I really like hearing how you did that. Thanks for sharing. Oh, here's a close-up of that heron security, or that heron
It's a railing.
I'm gonna push this up. And so I was looking at this one earlier, and are all these joints where the branches connect, are those forge welded, or are you using an electric welder for that?
Now that particular piece right there, that's a fairly early piece. I actually collaborated with my father on that one when he was putting together some steel sculpture and some architectural work. That's all arc welded together. But otherwise, all the pieces are forged.
The lines on this one are just so graceful.
Yeah, that's a fairly early railing that I put together. It was for a private residence over in Waitsburg. I actually have that railing in my shop right now. The house that it was on is currently being repainted. So it's in my shop right now, and I'm going to have the finish freshened up, and then I'll return it back to the house once it's painted.
Oh. It's a really nice fire poker set you've made. Fire tool set, rather. This is a great set of hinges. There's a detail shot coming up here, but they are just massive. And I think this was a job very well done, Ben.
Well, those are actually the front doors of my shop.
Oh, this is your own place, huh?
Yeah, that's the front doors of my shop right there. And each of those hinges, they're about 36 inches from end to end, and they're about 1/4 inch thick. And the hinge pins are 1/2 inch thick.
Is this all just like a wax finish?
Yeah, that's all a wax finish.
Oh, it's holding up outdoors really well.
Well, that was taken when they were first installed. They've acquired a bit of rust since they've been in service. That's the one weakness about a wax finish, is that it just doesn't last on the outside.
No.
It's only good for interior work. Yeah, that particular piece that we're seeing right now, that's a structural brace for a private residence in Walla Walla. And the shot we're seeing now is the detail piece, which is that basket twist with the additional vines wrapped around it. That was kind of an interesting project.
Yeah, it seems like it would have some challenges involved.
Yeah, that particular basket twist was actually hot cut out of the material itself. So it was basically cutting the bar into four separate pieces, and then twisting and then untwisting to get that shape. It was more of a challenge than you might think, because when you're trying to get that basket just right, steel, when it's hot, it acts like a big piece of taffy. And it took some pretty controlled heating to get that shape just right. Especially with it being in the middle of that bar.
Yeah, that bar looked like it was quite long, so I would think that would be an extra challenge on it, just to have to deal with all that mass.
I'd do a few things differently if I made that piece today.
Well, that shows we're all learning. It's always nice to be able to look back and say, oh, I'd do that differently.
Well, I think that's a common sentiment with all craftsmen.
Mm-hmm. I think we're coming on to the last few photos here. You've got like I'm not quite sure what you call this. Is it a lectern? Is it your local church? Is that correct? Pulpit.
It's a pulpit. Yes, that's at a local church here in Walla Walla. It's got a black walnut top, and then it has forged 3/4-inch bars for the frame, and then the details are all hot forged sheet steel. Then there's some bronze coloring in there. There's also some polished steel, particularly in the Descending Dove and the Open Bible. And then all the joints on it are riveted with half-lap joints.
Very well executed, Ben. And then this was another one. This is the same church, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's the same church, same commission. That's the communion table. And it's the same construction. And you can see the 3 panels there representing the articles of communion, which of course we have the grape cluster and the grapevine. We have the sheaf of wheat, and then we have the bread and the chalice in the center.
I took a couple close-ups here, or shared them. It's just so well done.
That's absolutely gorgeous, Ben.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Patricia says, stunning work.
Well, and that is the end of the slideshow. So if it works, I think, are you ready for your demo?
Yes, we are ready to go.
Great. Well, Claire, let's pin Ben, and I'm going to exit out of here and turn it over to you guys. And I'll just stay in the wings in case we have an internet problem. I'll jump in, but looking forward to watching this one. Thank you so much, Ben.
Yes, thank you, Kelly.
And when you stop sharing your screen, it'll give me more full control. There we go.